Ina mana ina reo e rorangatirama, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Helen Nicholson toko ingoa, te tumu whakarai tupua te wharoanga o tākou, no reira tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora, my name's Helen Nicholson and I'm the Acting Vice-Chancellor at the University of Otago, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this very special occasion to celebrate the promotion of Maree Thyne to Professor. And these lectures are probably a highlight of some of our weeks. They're a great opportunity for all of us to come together and listen to our amazing staff and gain an understanding of the breadth of the research that occurs across the university. I'd like to welcome colleagues, students and friends from across the university and those joining us via the live stream. But I'd like to give a special welcome to Maree's husband, Nick Devlin, her children, Macklin and Maisie, her friend Karen Bain, and Ayud Nakraprasit, a student of Maree's, who's with us from Thailand. So welcome to you all. We don't make it easy at Otago for people to be promoted to professor. And in order to be promoted, our colleagues need to show that they're outstanding in research, teaching and service, and also demonstrate leadership. As you will shortly hear, Maree has clearly met these criteria. Maree's research focus is consumer behaviour, particularly recently tourist behaviour. And Maree was talking about social distancing, perhaps in a slightly different context, a long time before COVID arrived. And I'm hoping that she's going to explain the difference between social distancing and physical distancing. Maree's an expert in cruise ship tourism, and I well remember her in early 2020 ringing me up and having a conversation about whether she should go ahead with a trip on a cruise ship to gather data because of the risk of COVID. Thankfully, she decided to delay the project. As well as being a great teacher, Maree has held various leadership roles across the university and is now the Pro Vice-Chancellor of Commerce. Congratulations, Maree, on your well-deserved promotion. We're very fortunate to have you at Otago. And it now gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Rob Lawson, who's going to provide a formal introduction to Professor Thyne. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Rob Lawson toku ingoa. I'm both delighted and privileged to have the task of introducing Professor Maree Thyne to you this evening. Maree is an outstanding academic and a dear friend who I first met in 1996. She has a BA in English in 1994 and followed that with a postgraduate diploma in tourism with distinction in 1995. In 1996, she came to work with me and others on a public goods science-funded research program that we had looking at aspects of tourist behavior and environmental and social impacts of tourism. So we employed her as a junior research fellow on that project, and she'd been with us probably for a matter of a few months or so. And she put her head round the door one morning and said, Rob, have you got time to answer a few questions that I have? And so I said, sure. And she came in, and really she only had one question. And that was, how do I get your job? I might be paraphrasing slightly, but that's essentially what you said. And so it started. A diploma for graduates in marketing and statistics. The statistics wasn't her first choice, really, I don't think, but typical of Maree, if something needs doing, note of her personality, without any fuss, it gets done. So no complaints, no anything. And of course the PhD. So she had some very clear ideas about her PhD, which I'm sure what she wanted to do for that. And they were subject to some quite strong external scrutiny. We wrote them up as an objective for the rebid on the tourism research to the Public Good Science Fund, and they passed the reviewers and the panel, and we got full funding for them. And then we also invited or suggested that Maree might want to go over to Melbourne and present a proposal to at a colloquium for doctoral students to a panel of international experts. Well, amongst those experts, there was a certain Professor Jordan Louviere, who had a reputation for being pretty tough, and he was also the world's #1 academic in the application of conjoint analysis, which was the technique that Maree had chosen for data analysis for her PhD, and quite a novel technique in application in her area. So I can guarantee you that whatever nerves Maree has tonight, they're probably nothing like the ones she had before that colloquium presentation all those years ago. And she was brilliant. So I want to just make a slight aside here, because all this seems wonderful, and it was. And Maree sailed through all these things brilliantly. But she did have one hiccup in her life at that time, which was the sad illness and death of her brother. And that affected everyone remarkably. But I have to make a comment that the fortitude and bravery which Maree showed through that time was absolutely amazing. And it didn't really deflect her. She was amazing at coping with that. So a memory for Matt, I think. And he would be very proud. The PhD was completed in 2001, and when she left Otago to take up a post at the Aberdeen Business School. And in that position, she established an active research record and started to develop a series of international links, which is maintained and developed ever since. Maree returned to Otago as a senior lecturer in 2006 and was promoted to associate professor in 2011. Since then, she's taken time for maternity and family, as well as continuing an active career, and was promoted to professor in 2011, the same year as she took on the role of HOD in marketing. And now, as we've heard, she's moved to the position of Pro-Vice-Chancellor for the School of Business. A promotion to professor demonstrates excellence, as the Vice-Chancellor said, in all 3 areas. Just finding a few figures behind that. She's the author of over 100 publications in journals, books, and refereed conference proceedings. A quarter of those are in A or A-star rated journals. And she's also won several Best Paper Awards at conferences and been invited as a distinguished researcher to universities in both Japan and the United Kingdom. And she's been active in passing on those skills by supervising a dozen PhDs and countless master's students over the years. And as well as a research record, I have to make special mention of her teaching. Her teaching is both research-led and student-centered, and that's not always an easy combination to achieve. And if you look at the comments, some student comments on her evaluations, they're littered with words like enthusiastic, superb communication, inspiring, captivating, attention-holding. She teaches people how to think critically and how to learn. So she did get my job, and now she's got one which I never aspired to at all. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite Professor Maree Thyne to present her inaugural professorial lecture.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko ōreki te moanga, ko opahi te awa. Ko ōreki te moanga, ko Maree toka wingawa. Ko Michael toku mātua. Ko Judy toku whaia. Nō Pleasant Point aho. Nō leila, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Well, here we are. Welcome to my inaugural professorial lecture. Vice-Chancellor, tēnā koe. Professor Lawson, tēnā koe. Thank you both so much for the introduction and for your very, very kind words, Rob. I don't actually think I've got anything more to say, and I'll probably take that as the fastest one and carry on with our evening. To my esteemed colleagues, students, friends and whānau, a big thank you for taking the time out of your Thursday evening to join me here today. Although I distinctly remember telling you, many of you, that you were to find something else to do. I would like to thank Ayud for being here tonight. Ayud lives in Thailand, but fortunately has been just spending some time in Christchurch, so has travelled here today. I was Ayud's tutor and lecturer 23 years ago, and I still get a Christmas card from him every year. It is an absolute honour to have you here tonight. Thank you so much. Well, this takes me back to preparing for my PhD viva. I must admit, I wasn't too excited about it. I'm not sure how many people are, but Rob Lawson said to me in his naturally encouraging way, "Come on, make the most of it. When else are you going to get to walk into a room and just talk about your PhD?" I feel the same here. 40 minutes just to talk about me. So I will begin with my journey, which includes many of you here in this room. I will then move to my research, which again includes many of you here in this room. And I will finish with my words of thanks to many of you here in this room, and unfortunately, some who aren't. Gosh, already. Okay, I'm going to have to work on that for the next few minutes. So, to begin, I had what I believe to be the distinct fortune to grow up on a farm in South Canterbury, a beautiful area called Levels Valley, which is very close to Pleasant Point, which is very close to Timaru. It was the farm that my father, Michael Thyne, was born on. He named the farm Honora Kilkee. Honora was the Christian name of the first woman that we know of who lived on the farm. And Kilkee is where the Thynes originated from in County Clare, Ireland. My parents owned the farm until they retired in 2014. It was truly magical. I rode horses and motorbikes from the age of 7, drove tractors from 10, and our Land Rover from the age of 12. I hugely value the upbringing that I had. It was tough. The droughts and huge interest rates of the 1980s made farming very difficult, and it was touch and go as to whether we were going to be able to hang on to the farm. Fortunately, we made it through, and I believe that the concepts of toughing it out and stickability are values instilled in me from a very young age. Also, the farming attitude. If you don't do the work, there will be no one there to do it for you, really got me through my PhD and beyond. It is a get on with it work ethic that I believe I still have. But farming is also about community and people. Growing up, there was always help shared across the community. Everyone chipped in around the busy times of tailing lambs, dipping and shearing sheep, and summer cropping and baling. This sense of community has always stuck with me, the value of people working together. Some of my special farming skills were recognised by our local newspaper, the Timaru Herald, when I was about 9. My children get into the ODT for being the official dinosaur ambassador for the Otago Museum, or starring in a children's TV program. I made it into the newspaper for riding a sheep. Badly, as you can see. And if you notice, the next one tried desperately to get away. I probably always assumed I would stay on a farm, and my teachers at Pleasant Point were certainly under the same impression. The majority of my school reports detailing my aptitude for socialising and farm talk versus applying myself seriously to learning. Now, Macklin and Maisie, you close your ears. This indeed is an example of do what I say and not what I do. A couple of clanger fifth form school reports, year 11, are my particular favourites. My English teacher, who was surprisingly influential in my love of English, described me as bright, amusing, lacks confidence in her own ability, and can drive me nuts. And I think that any dean of a business school would be proud of the following from her fifth form economics teacher. Maree is not particularly able, but has scored reasonably during this year. The advice given from my school guidance counsellor in seventh form was to either become a hairdresser or try Polytechnic. So I pursued my interest in people and love of conversation, or just talking, and went to Ōrākei Polytechnic. I just put a building up because I thought we should move away from the reports, obviously. And I went to Ōrākei Polytechnic for a year in Timaru, completing a certificate in tourism and hospitality. Little did I know that this certificate and the experience from it would influence my career choices for the next 30 years. Many great things came out of my experience at Ōrākei, but two in particular. One, a lifelong friend, Sarita Muir, and the other was work experience. The work experience that I was fortunate to get was a receptionist position at the Hermitage, Mount Cook. I ended up being offered a full-time receptionist position and worked at the Hermitage for nearly 5 months. An amazing experience and one that cemented my passion for tourism. This was the beginning of the 1990s, when our international visitor arrival numbers had reached nearly 1 million. By 2019, they had reached nearly 4 million. And our largest target markets were Australia, USA, and Japan. The Hermitage, as we know, was an extremely popular stop for overseas visitors, and in particular bus tours from Japan and the US. I vividly remember an American woman approaching me at the reception desk and asking me why we had so many signs around the Hermitage that were written in Japanese. She told me that if I had wanted to go to Japan on a holiday, I would have done so. Rather, I've come to New Zealand and I would expect the signs to be in English. This comment proved to shape my PhD research half a decade later and beyond. So February 1991 was decision time. Stay at the Hermitage or be the first in my family to go to university. I dived into the deep end and moved down south, shifting into Inaugural and embarking on a BA, English Literature, inspired by my high school teacher whom I drove nuts. The results of the first year of my degree reflect a very good time had at Inaugural and some excellent lifelong friends, especially Betty and Rachel. My second year is where a corner was turned. The lack of self-confidence that my English teacher referred to was eased through the behaviour of one tutor that I had for English 276, New Zealand Literature. We had the wonderful Lawrence Jones as the lecturer, and I had Heather Maree as my tutor. Fortunately, this paper used the plusage system, which worked quite well for me. And when I nearly failed the first assignment, Heather Maree met with me and offered her help going forward. It certainly worked because the next assignment I received from her was an A+, my first ever in my life. I still remember the feeling. Obviously, I thought I'd picked up somebody else's assignment, but when I checked the name, Here was someone who had helped me, believed in me, and then approved of what I had done. The confidence this gave me changed what I believed I could do. This single academic had an enormous role in shifting my own views of my ability. So, finishing my BA with significantly better grades than what I started with, fortunately by this stage, Professor Jeff Kearsley had set up the Centre for Tourism in the Division of Commerce, and this centre offered a postgrad diploma in tourism, which is what I did. It was predominantly taught by Professor Kearsley and also a relatively new lecturer, now Emeritus Professor Jürgen Noff, and a very newly graduated PhD, now Distinguished Professor James Hyam. Not only did I have excellent lecturers, but I also had some awesome classmates, including Sarah Walton. My dissertation for the diploma was on carrying capacity of the Skipper's Canyon, specifically perceptions that visitors had of how other visitors, the sheer number of other visitors, impacted their experience of the canyon, so the impact of crowding on experiences. The findings, much to the relief of Henry Van Ash and A.J. Hackett, showed that there was little impact on experiences, mainly because people were going to the canyon to do the Skipper's bungee jump, and there'd be quite a different experience if there weren't tons of people there to watch you. Did a bungee jump ever really happen if there was no one there to see it? Fortunately, Professor Kearsley and his colleague from the Department of Marketing were awarded public goods science funding, for which they could employ research assistants. I returned from a stint in Queenstown working in hotels back to the university to start a master's and take up one of the research positions. I worked on carrying capacity projects with Jeff Kearsley and a fab research team, meeting my dear friend Emma Holt, and then I was moved into a different project around resident attitudes towards tourism development, being run by Professor Rob Lawson. I had never met Rob before, nor indeed anyone from the Department of Marketing, but it was one of the most fortunate things to have ever happened to me. Rob became my primary PhD supervisor, and Sarah Todd joined the supervisory team also. I could not be more grateful for the support of my supervisor team. They were awesome. Thank you, Sarah, and a big thank you to Rob. My supervisor, head of department, mentor, and friend. You made me want to succeed, and you gave me the confidence to do so. I'm going to leave this one up there for a while though. While doing my PhD, and largely encouraged by Rob, so that I might actually get an understanding of marketing and some kind of small grasp of statistics, I did a diploma for graduates in marketing and statistics. One of the assignments I did for the consumer behaviour paper I was a student in involved interviews at the Otago Museum, where I sought to understand the deep-seated values-based motivations that visitors have for going to a museum. I happened to talk to a fellow PhD student about this small project I was working on, and she suggested I try and publish it, which I did. Thank you, Inaugural. Not only was this a real confidence boost whilst doing my PhD, but it also shaped much of my research in the future. I have naturally leaned towards qualitative research. It's got nothing to do with statistics. Or what could be better than having a conversation and then analysing it? And this article has become one of my most cited publications. The most important finding in this study was the prevalence of socially oriented motivations behind visiting a museum, being with friends and family. Whereas traditionally a museum visit had been linked to more individualistic motivations, such as education and knowledge. The push for edutainment was a large component of this paper, the combination of education and entertainment. Encouraging hands-on experiences for families, especially children, to engage with museums rather than passively view static objects. Consider the changes in the museums over the past 23 years since this work. Once I finished my PhD, which we'll get back to, I was ready to explore academia and life outside of Otago. Inspired by the only Scottish people I knew, and believing all Scots people to be as wonderful and enthusiastic for life as them, my second big thank you and shout out to my dear friends Ken and Sandra Deans, I moved to Aberdeen for a lecturing position at the Robert Gordon University. I continued to publish from my PhD whilst also developing new areas of research in Scotland, working with colleagues at RGU. There was quite an advantage being a big fish in a small, new university pond. Not only did the people of Aberdeen, foolishly as it turns out, pin their hopes on this Kiwi being a pro-touch rugby player, but various Scottish tourism policy and government groups called for a New Zealand perspective on tourism development in Scotland, recognising the successes that we had had through the 1990s and early 2000s as a tourism destination. The input I had here was significantly more successful than my touch rugby skills. During my 5 years at RGU, I helped set up and manage an organisation established to aid the actioning of a national tourism framework, which was developed by Scottish Enterprise. Tourism Knowledge Scotland, the National Tourism Board, brought together tourism academics around Scotland with the aim of assisting in tourism policy through knowledge transfer between academics and industry. This was an excellent experience and an example of town and gown partnership. While at Aberdeen, I also taught into the Masters of Marketing program at St Andrews University, a fantastic experience of teaching to very large masters programs, and a big thank you to Jim Bell, Brendan Gray and Rod McNaughton, who were teaching at St Andrews at the time and managed to convince them that they needed another Otago person treading their boards. During a chat with Brendan, he told me that Otago were looking to hire. I had been in Scotland at that stage for 5 years. I loved every minute of it, but felt that it was now or possibly never to return home. So I gave it a shot. I applied for a position back in the Department of Marketing and was hired. A big thank you to David Ballantyne, Phil Harris, Jürgen Knopf, and a smaller thanks to Ken Deans. He knows why. So I returned to Otago in 2006, and I would like to take a moment to send some araha to David and Jackie Ballantyne, who are online just now. Since returning to Otago, I have taught across all levels and a number of subjects. I love teaching, interacting, and engaging with students, playing my part in their university experience and preparing them for their place in the world. We have a challenge ahead of us around what such engagement looks like in an increasingly tech-dependent world, and a world with financial pressures where studying full-time is increasingly becoming a luxury. Certainly, this environment is very different from when I started teaching, as it is for most of us. But we have our students whom we can learn from. We have amazing students, and we are so fortunate with our OUSA executive, who are front and centre of the learning environment. One of the highlights in my role this year has been working more closely with OUSA, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge Quinton Jane for all his mahi and leadership of OUSA this year. So that's my journey. Pleasant Point, Dunedin, Aberdeen, and back to Dunedin, all the hot spots of the world. And throughout this journey is my research. And I thought I would just focus on 3 main research streams with you. My PhD research, which explored the concept of social distance and continues to feed into my research projects today. This research was influenced by my time at the Hermitage. My research on museums and literary tourism, influenced by the study that I told you about earlier and my English literature degree. And my research on cruise tourism, influenced by the desire to go on a cruise. I embarked on my PhD in the late 1990s, a time when sustainable tourism was a hot topic. Research was progressing away from sustainability referring mainly to physical and natural environment to a focus on the social and cultural impacts of tourism and the need to consider these when developing tourism products, much like what is being discussed at the moment in the media around the proposed Terrace Airport development. It was finally being recognised, although arguably over 20 years later still not being actioned, that sustainable tourism management relies on the support of the host community and that there was an increased need to research residents' perceptions of the tourism industry and tourism development. I argued in my PhD that although research was shifting toward including the host community in tourism development, the focus had largely been on specific attributes of the community members and how these might impact their opinions about tourism. For example, were they employed in the tourism industry? How far did they live from the tourism centre? And how long a resident had lived in their area for? My thesis was driven by my experience at the Hermitage, with the American tourists complaining about the signs in Japanese, and also media releases around the type of tourist who was visiting New Zealand at that time, and a demand through the media that tourists should act and behave in the same way as we do, when in Rome or New Zealand, do as the Kiwis do. So I embarked on a project investigating the impact that the type of tourist has on resident attitudes towards tourism development. Incorporating a concept taken from sociology, social distance, exploring how the social distance experienced with various tourist types would impact upon the host community's support for tourism. When I began investigating social distance at this time, it was not a common term. It had been used a bit in sociology in the 60s and 70s and earlier, but not really in the 80s and 90s, and certainly not in tourism or marketing literature. The year 2020 saw a dramatic resurgence of the term social distance, but I and others argue that we've not been using this in the correct sense. Rather, we were physically distancing. I understand how the term came about, a concern around social gatherings, so distance yourselves physically while you're socialising, which then probably got shortened to social distance. But social distance actually refers to sympathetic understanding, the sympathetic understanding that exists between people, and was often used in earlier literature as a measurement of prejudice, racism, discrimination, stereotyping, and ethnocentrism. Since there had not been any social distance scales developed for the context of tourism and host-guest relations, I embarked on developing such a scale. I also developed a conjoint analysis experiment to manipulate the nationality, age, and type of tourist, so whether they were a backpacker or a bus tourist, to determine which of these factors to be most important to tourist preferences. The nationalities used in my research were United States, Japanese, German, and Australian, presenting 4 of the major international inbound markets of the late 1990s. The results of my thesis showed that New Zealanders felt more socially close to US and Australian tourists than they did to German or Japanese, and that residents who were less accepting of tourism development showed higher levels of social distance, especially to German and Japanese tourists. The conjoint experiment confirmed nationality of the tourists to be the most important factor in determining tourist type preferences. And what were the impacts of these results? The research was disseminated not only through academic publications, but also through Public Good Science Fund, where recommendations were made around internal marketing strategies. I recommended education programs designed first for industry members such as accommodation managers and frontline staff to be rolled out through organisations such as Kiwi Host. One of my focus group participants who I'd had was a motel owner who admitted to giving only Asian tourists a whiz-up as soon as they arrived to stay in his motel. He stated that because it's colder here than their country, when they go to bed, they open the door of the oven and turn the elements on full. The participant never suggested that this might be dangerous, rather just a real pain for him because he had to clean up the condensation in the morning. Therefore, when Asian visitors arrived, he proudly spoke about the whiz-up he gave them of not to make a mess. I'm pretty sure it would not only be tourists from Asian countries who may have found his motel room cold. And I suggest that an installation of extra heating, or at least making sure the visitor knows how to use effectively the heating that is in place, for example, instructions in their own language, would have been a better solution. Adapting the product to suit the customer, advocated in traditional marketing strategy for years. Fast forward 15 years, and a visiting scholar, Maree Yoshida, who was from Ritsumeikan University in Osaka, Japan, came for a 12-month visit to our department. Japan was at that time, around 2015, witnessing a dramatic increase in inbound tourism, and Japan's government had expressed a commitment to developing the international tourism industry further. Pre-COVID, most foreign tourists visiting Japan came from other Asian nationals, with the top visitor numbers being from China, then Korea, and Taiwan. Outside of Asia, the larger markets were USA and Australia. When we collected our data in 2016, visitor numbers were certainly on an uphill trajectory, and there was little research being undertaken on the Japanese residents and their views of tourism development. So myself, Leah Watkins, and Maree Yoshida adapted my social distance scale for a Japanese context. And using a sample from across Japan, we measured the social distance perceived between residents and tourists, namely Japanese, Taiwanese, USA, and Australian. And then tested that perceived social distance with attitudes towards tourism development generally. We found significantly higher social distance with Chinese and Taiwanese tourists, and with higher feelings of social distance came significantly less support for tourism generally. In this study, we argued for government and regional strategies to be implemented to encourage positive Japanese and visitor relations. We critiqued the example of the recently published Traveller's Etiquette Guide to Hokkaido, a pamphlet published and distributed especially to Chinese tourists to assist them to understand the Japanese mind for a pleasant and rewarding visit. The pamphlet proceeds to points and tips on how Chinese visitors should behave around Japanese locals. Whether that is, you should speak in a whisper, you should be punctual, ensuring orderly queue behaviour, and you should have general tranquil and tidy table etiquette. By following these tips, the Hokkaido Public Interest Association promises that the doors will open to many joyful and memorable experiences. Instead, we suggested guidance could be provided for the host communities, especially those working within the tourism industry, around the value and importance of understanding the Chinese market and other visitors, and how to provide a quality experience for these markets. Such as the China Toolkit that was developed by Tourism New Zealand in 2016 for businesses to understand and cater for our growing Chinese visitor market. I presented this research to the Japan Society for Marketing and Distribution, and industry members certainly seemed aware of the rhetoric being used and were actively promoting a change in focus. However, this was in 2019, and now, of course, the marketing is about just trying to get people reignited for travel back to Japan. The second research stream I want to share with you combines my passion of tourism and literature. In 2006, Anne-Marie Heed, then a lecturer at Deakin University in Melbourne, visited the tourism department. I ended up working with Anne-Marie for the next nearly 20 years until she retired from her professor role at Victoria University in Melbourne this year. Maree and I were especially interested in literary museums and the visitor experience. In particular, the role that authenticity plays in the museum visitor experience. Authenticity has been considered to be at the heart of a museum. And while there has been some discussion as to whether museums ever really present the authentic, it has been argued in the literature that authenticity is a measure of museums' distinctiveness. However, in the context of reduced funding and increased competition, today's museums are challenged with a task of sourcing, preserving, and presenting the authentic. Tours instead may be staged or completely scripted, and objects displayed might be replicas. The exhibitions can be virtual, or the guides dressed in period costumes. The inauthentic has become as much a part of the visitor experience as the authentic. Maree and I were interested in understanding the processes by which museums and visitors negotiate this inauthentic. We set our research within two literary museums, 56 Eden Street, the childhood home of Janet Frame in Oamaru, and the Catherine Mansfield House, the birthplace of Catherine Mansfield in Wellington. We found that visitors and curators together co-created the experience that visitors have in both museums. It is the way in which the attributes of authenticity are communicated to visitors. They are guided to create the value from their museum experience. While both museums provide very different experiences and rely on different types of authenticity, for example, most of the artefacts at 56 Eden Street are authentic to the era that Janet lived there, but not to Janet herself, whereas the Catherine House contains many items owned by Catherine herself. The outcome for the visitors appears to be very similar. Visitors at both museums felt close to the author and their life. These feelings were created through their own knowledge, past experience, sense of nostalgia, and in some cases, their devotion to the author. And it was co-created by the curator and the guides, where they are often vital in developing and producing a familiarity with the author, an understanding and sense of their home. Whether this be through expert storytelling or the provision of artefacts, visitors to both museums make a connection with it. Visitors and the curators work together to co-produce the valuable museum experience. Maree and I worked a lot with the 56 Eden Street Trust, focusing on the role that the curators play. Visitors don't need authentic objects to have an authentic experience. In the instance of the Literary Museum, it is enough for them to just be there, to be walking where Janet or Catherine had walked. One respondent at 56 Eden Street stressed that for them, it was a link to Janet, her family, and her place. We encouraged the curators of 56 Eden Street to utilise their own fandom of Janet to build the experience for visitors. An easy task when people are coming to the museum just to get the sense of an author they admire. As one respondent put it, "I wanted to imagine how it felt to be here. I wanted to somehow feel closer to Janet's experiences by visiting the home she lived in, somehow experiencing something of her life by walking through the rooms she walked in. To be in her home makes my experience of Janet Frame and her work more personal." I have more recently expanded this research with my friend and colleague, Professor Gretchen Larson from Durham University, where we have investigated the link between literary tourism and place branding, using the popular tourist town of Haworth in the UK. Haworth was the home of the Bronte family. Emily Bronte, of course, wrote Wuthering Heights, and Charlotte Bronte wrote Jane Eyre. In this project, we focused on the role that atmosphere plays in the Haworth destination brand and how it contributes to the visitor experience. We found that the atmosphere in and around Haworth has a significant and multifaceted impact on visitors' experiences. The weather, built, and natural landscape play an enormous role in setting the scene for visitors to connect with the place and with the Brontes. The wuthering atmosphere provides access and a sense of genuine connection to the authors, their work, history, and lives, resulting in a moving and embodied tourist experience. Indeed, the more wily and windy the weather was, the better the experience. As one respondent remarked, Top Withens and the surrounding landscape is so atmospheric. We did the walk on a sunny spring day, but I bet it's better in the dark. I bet you it's better on a dark, gloomy, breezy day to get the full Wuthering Heights experience. Another tourism experience, also heavily reliant on the weather, to ensure satisfactory use of the deck chairs beside the pool, is cruise tourism. Okay, that was a terrible segue, but we are here now. The final major research strand that I would like to talk to you about tonight is my research on cruise tourism. Yes, it is a hard life being an academic. The work I have put into funding applications to get me on those cruise ships, fortunately, has paid off. In 2008, 58 cruise ships visited Port Chalmers and Dunedin. Just 10 years later, this number had doubled, bringing in over 238,000 passengers into Dunedin in the 2018 season. I was drawn to this research not only through an interest of travel, but also it provided me the opportunity to work with Dr. James Henry. James was a seasoned cruiser, and the city of Dunedin was pretty desperate to understand how they could manage this growing sector. For those of you who knew James, you'll remember his vast and industry and community connections and his passion for people and a chat. So he, of course, became involved in advising Tourism Dunedin, the then regional tourism organisation, on the growing cruise tourism industry. James knew my interest in tourism research and asked me to join him. What followed was a 15-year involvement in the New Zealand cruise tourism industry. This research involved the difficult task of undertaking a few cruises ourselves to uncover the in situ first-hand cruise tourist experience. Previously, there was very little understood in the academic literature or within the industry on passenger expectations of a shore experience. Most cruise literature had focused on experiences passengers have on board a ship and the motivations for taking a cruise. Literature had not focused on the experience of being off the ship. But unsurprisingly, the increasing number of destinations in New Zealand that were being visited by ships wanted to understand the product and experience demand from these types of tourists. James and I were founding members of the Dunedin Cruise Network Group, made up of major tourism operators across the Otago area, and I remain a member of the group and lead the development and dissemination of research on the behaviour of cruise passengers. This research has led to tangible changes to the welcome received by passengers, especially at Port Otago, and the understanding of the types of experiences and products that this market would like to access. This was the welcome received when passengers disembarked their ship in Port Chalmers in 2007. The information could be accessed around Dunedin and Port Chalmers was at this small desk. Note the didgeridoo, an authentic Dunedin artefact. A year later, we had helped set up an information site container which was on portside for when visitors arrived, so small steps. And now we have wayfinding and an entire warm and enclosed shed with Wi-Fi where passengers can mingle with volunteers and receive first-hand insight and information about their visit, as well as view collateral and available for a number of attractions and activities. I have published on various aspects of cruise tourism, although all have been related to the shore experience, including investigating the role that the crew play in advising passengers what to do when they go ashore, the barriers passengers experience for visiting a port of call, and the decision-making process that the passenger undergoes in deciding upon shore excursions. But what I am most proud of is the work that James and I have done with Cruise New Zealand, Port Otago and Dunedin City Council, and the opportunity to see real change in the product offering and experience received by the passenger. I am working on developing this research stream further by incorporating my interest in resident attitudes and tourism development, and am currently analysing survey data collected from across the motu to understand resident views of cruise tourism, urged by a strong return last season of the cruise industry, and with that, the enormous negative sentiment expressed in the New Zealand media. The media messages questioned the value of cruise tourism, the demand for cruise tourism in communities, and whether they deserve a welcome at all. And of course, the notion of cruise ships being super COVID spreaders. Preliminary analysis of the data shows some positive perceptions around job opportunity and increased income for local people, but common concerns expressed were around crowding, competition for amenities and facilities, pollution and rubbish. Respondents were asked to rank cruise tourism compared to 10 other forms of tourism, such as cultural tourism, business tourism, visiting friends and relatives, and sports tourism. And cruise tourism, on average, ranked the lowest and least preferred. There is a lot of mahi in the industry needed around internal marketing strategy and messages. Cruise New Zealand and regional tourism organisations need to work together on developing messages which positively frame the industry and address or answer the concerns that host communities have, and then convince the media to pick up and publish good news stories. But this is still work in progress for another time and day and not another IPL. And that was a whistle-stop tour of 3 major research streams that I have been involved in over the past 20 years. And it's been awesome. And I know that there is a lot more to come. So, not only was the move back from Scotland the right thing to do for my career, but it also proved pretty good for the personal life. Sharing too much information right now. But I had returned from Scotland, a single woman, in what turned out to be a man drought. All you heard on the radio in New Zealand at that time was a woman in their 30s is more likely to get run over by a bus than they are to meet a man that they will marry. I was about to break the news to my dad that he could spend the wedding fund that he had been saving up for many years, when my wonderful friends Mike and Karen stepped in. Mike swiftly set me up on a blind date, and the rest is family story in the making. A big shout out to my very good friend Karen, who's been there with me and for me all the way, and to Mike for finding me a husband. So speaking of whom, my whānau, Nick, I would not be standing here if it wasn't for you. Your support, encouragement and wise words. Oh, and your patience, perseverance, and indeed calm, loving personality. Thank you. And we are blessed with 2 awesome children. Macklin, you make me proud every single day. Your outlook on life inspires me. Your willingness to give everything a go, to stride out into the world every day and make your very significant mark, fills me with so much pride and admiration. Maisie, your thirst for life is infectious, and your empathy for people never ceases to amaze me. You are a pure joy to be around. You have an awesome love of life and people, and you bring so much energy, spark, and happiness to our lives. And now for the rest of you. A big thank you to my previous HODs for all your support and encouragement. David Bousson, Rob Lawson, Phil Harris, Ken Deans, and Rob Aitken. My PVCs, Alan McGregor, George Benwell, and Robin Gould. A very special thanks to George and Robin for all your support and advice over the years. My senior leadership team peers, especially my fellow PVCs. A very big thank you to you all for your mentoring and your guidance. the HODs and Associate Deans that I work alongside in the Division of Commerce, it's an absolute privilege to work with you. Thank you. I am so grateful for all the faith that you've put into me so far. The Department of Marketing, especially Kirsten, Leah, Rob, Febke, who I did see before when I came in. There she is. And Kathy. And also to Sergio, Tony, I saw as well, Sheila, Lisa, John. Indeed, a big thank you to the Department of Marketing as a whole, past and present. And my amazing friends and whānau outside of work, the mountain goats, Jax, Meg and Anna, and to their extended whānau. Thank you so much for being here today. Wine Club. There you are up the back, of course. Thank you very much. I thank you now. Wasn't thanking you earlier in the week. Tracy and Mark, John and Jenny, Susie, Kate, everyone else. Joss, thank you. And just some final thank yous and special acknowledgements. Mark Wildsmith, who many of you knew and loved, an awesome and beautiful human, full of life and love, and who only saw the good and the best in people. He would have been here today, and he would have been the first to have been making the after-dinner speech. My mother Judy, for instilling in me determination, resilience, and a just get on with it attitude, for the love and support you have always given to my children. They love their nana very much. My brother Matthew, who was my rock and my best friend. We were two peas in a pod, and Matt did die of cancer in the last year of my PhD. And my dad, Michael, who was the president of my fan club. It wasn't a large gathering. He was often there on his own. It was my dad who said that I could do a PhD many years ago. Sorry. And when I returned to Dunedin to do the work as an RA, he encouraged me to do the PhD. Now, one of the last conversations that I had with my dad was in 2020, and it was around applying for this promotion. He told me that it was great and that I had applied and that I only had myself to thank. I told him that he was wrong and that I had him to thank for all his support. And my dad died suddenly a couple of weeks after that conversation. Oh, I meant to put that up earlier. There you all are, take it in. Finally, I would like to end with a reflection on our role as academics. We are in a privileged position where we have an opportunity to change lives, to change the perception someone has of themselves. We can make a difference to the lives of the students who choose to study here at the University of Otago. We have the chance to give them confidence and courage to go on and make their mark and take their place in this ever-changing world. I know that because it happened to me. Heather Maree, Rob Lawson, Helen Nicholson, and many of you right here in this room believed in me and made me believe in myself. Nō reira, ngā mihi nui.
Well, Maree, what a great IPL. Thank you so much. It was really lovely to hear your personal journey and your research and the way that you wove them together. And particularly to hear that you, like many of us here, didn't really initially plan to go into academia, and that your journey has been slightly circuitous on the way to get here. But it was fantastic. I think the toughing it out and get on with it attitude is something that we all appreciate about you, and it stuck with you, and it's obviously been passed on to your children, so that's great. And I think the other thing that came out was the importance of what we do and the ability to enable and empower our students to be who they can be in the future. So thank you for that. And your research, well, obviously you've published a lot, but actually what came out from your talk was the impact that your research has had, whether that be in developing the National Tourism Framework in Scotland, your role in developing the social distance scale, and how that's affected marketing practices across the world, your work on museums, the role that curators have, and the factors that affect visitor experiences. That in itself would be enough, wouldn't it, for a professor? But also then your role and your research into the cruise ships and the changes that you've made in the experience for cruise passengers coming to Dunedin. And I think in a university that we're interacting with our community and working closely with them, your work with Cruise New Zealand, with the DCC, and Port Otago is really something that we should all aspire to. So thank you. Perhaps what has touched me most is your passion, your warmth, your humour, and the enthusiasm that you have that really shone through. I can now understand why your students love you and why I heard you made an effort to come down from Thailand. So, that really came through. And I think it reflects how your colleagues view you, both your colleagues in commerce and those on the senior leadership team. So, Maree, we're really grateful. We're very fortunate, and we love having you in Otago. So thank you. And I have a small gift here that you might know what it is. So once again, please thank you. Thank you. And the only thing I have now to do is to thank you all for coming and to invite you all to come over to the staff club for refreshments where you can talk with Maree and tell her how wonderful you think she is too. So thank you all, and please come over to the staff club.